For more insight on this, we actually talked to the journalist who broke this story, Barton Gellman. He just got back recently from talking to Snowden in a 14-hour interview which he conducted in Moscow. Gellman is the first journalist to speak in person with Snowden since fleeing to Russia. So I first asked him why he thought Snowden granted him this interview and why now.
Well, to back up, he has not wanted to be at the center of the story. He wants the story to be about electronic surveillance and the limits of espionage in democracy, and so he's kept away from the story. I spent a long time trying to talk him into the idea that at the end of the year, after half a year of this remarkable global debate, that there needed to be a kind of summing up, what have we learned, what does it mean, and that we needed his voice in that story, and he agreed to let me come and see him.
So this has been in the works for a very long time, because you, as I understand it, were in contact with him back in June or back in, spring, spring when he released all of these documents. So you've been in touch with him over the months.
I've had a lot of contact with him, beginning, sort of half a year or more ago, and that's all been at the keyboard, and I felt like it was time for us to meet.
Wow. Well, you were with him for 2 days, which is a pretty extensive amount of time, 14 hours of conversation. How would you describe Edward Snowden right now? I mean, just in terms of sort of his demeanor and his mentality.
He is remarkably sort of at peace with everything. He's a man under considerable pressure, I must assume, but he doesn't show it. He's feeling like he did what he set out to do. When he says that he's accomplished his mission, what he means is that he's taken a very important subject out of a secret world and handed it to the public so that the people can decide for themselves where they want to draw the lines instead of having the lines drawn for them.
Mm-hmm. And in the article, you mentioned that when interviewing him, his guard never really dropped, which I thought was interesting, considering you're saying that he was remarkably calm and whatnot. Did you get the sense that he was sort of constantly worrying or concerned at all about his future, which is basically unknown at this point?
He doesn't project concern about his future. What I mean by that he didn't drop his guard is that he has boundaries. For one thing, he's a very private person. He understands that he is in the news, that he has done something very much newsworthy. He wants the news to be about the policy, the subject, the documents themselves. He doesn't see that he's got any obligation to talk about his personal life. And he has natural security concerns. And so he pays attention to what he says.
It's interesting that such a private person is now so much in the open, in the public right now. But can you talk about how you prepared for this trip? Did you have to leave your laptop, your cell phone at all? I mean, were there tons of precautions that you had to take before going over there?
I can say a little bit about that. I did not bring anything with me that I was not prepared to have one or another government take hold of and search or keep or copy. So no, I didn't bring anything sensitive. I brought an empty notebook computer, and I brought a telephone I don't normally use with none of my data on it.
Right.
And as far as I know, those precautions were superfluous in the end because no one stopped me.
And have you had any issues since you've returned? Have you been approached at all by anybody asking you questions, interrogating you?
No,
nothing of that sort.
Interrogations, no.
Okay, then that means that you prepared well. Well, one of the things that I found most interesting is something that Edward Snowden said. He said, "I'm not trying to bring down the NSA. I'm working to improve the NSA. I'm still working for the NSA right now. They are the only ones who don't realize it." Did Snowden have anything to say about the current reform efforts underway on Capitol Hill or the courts or anything of that nature?
Well, it's interesting. He clearly has his own views about what ought to happen. What he most wants to make sure is that there can be an open debate about them with full knowledge. So it was all in a secret court. It was in a very small committee of Congress. For example, members of Congress rely on their staffs. There may be 1 in 10 members of Congress has a staffer who is cleared for material at the level of secrecy that this stuff was kept. So most of them didn't understand very much about what was going on. We spoke just before a very big week for him that vindicated many of his assertions. I mean, he has said all along he believes that some of the programs at the NSA are illegal. Well, soon after we spoke, a federal judge, the first one to consider it in open court, says that one of the main programs of the NSA is unconstitutional, or almost certainly unconstitutional. The president's own review board comes back with many reform proposals. The leaders of the U.S. technology industry come and tell the president in person that the NSA's actions are harming the information economy. So he got a lot of validation in really the last working week of the year.
Absolutely. Were you able to talk to him at least through the keyboard about those developments?
Well, you know, I'm not going to add anything here to what I've already published,
okay.
but I would say that you know, sort of that he and his circles are pleased with what's been going on.
That's not very surprising. Well, Snowden was insistent that he would never want to publish these leaks all at once, that would be, quote, suicide watch. Can you explain a little bit what he meant by that?
It's not, he opposes publication, dumping all the documents out, not only all at once. He doesn't want me to publish everything that I have. He wants me to use my own judgment about what is newsworthy and what would do harm. So it's not only he doesn't want it all at once, he doesn't necessarily want it all published in the first place. What he's talking about with suicide is this. There are people who claim that he has some other cache of material that he's got rigged up to a dead man's switch so that if he doesn't keep checking in, something bad happens to him, then he unleashes this whole thing on the world. Now, I mean, first of all, there's no evidence for that. It's contrary to what he says he wants. But he said, just look at it logically. If I have rigged up a dead man switch, and then I may as well just, you know, basically ask everyone to shoot me, because any service in the world that really wants to see this stuff go public, all they have to do is get rid of me. So it's illogical. He says it's not a dead man switch, it's a suicide switch.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you having this material and you having to make the decision of what gets released and when. How is it a concerted effort? How are you making these decisions?
I am reviewing material. I am reviewing it with a very small number of trusted colleagues. I'm doing reporting around it. I mean, a lot of it is in the form of clues. There might be, you know, one line in each of, you know, 16 documents that makes me think that there's something going on or something of interest. I check it out. I talk to government officials. I talk to people in industry. Sometimes I'm persuaded that my idea was wrong. Sometimes I'm persuaded by government that it would be a bad idea to publish the story. But most often we find something that we think is interesting and of public import, and in consultation with my editors at the Post, we publish.
And lastly, you know, The Guardian was threatened by the UK government and forced to destroy the copies on their server. And I was wondering if that's ever been an issue for you or the Washington Post. I mean, how have you been able to maintain these documents and really protect them?
If there had been threats or coercion used against me or the Washington Post, you would know it. That would be news, and we would be the first to report it. There's been no attempt by the U.S. government to compel us to do anything. There have been times when they've asked us, they've tried to persuade us not to publish something. There are times we've agreed, times we haven't. And to the rest of your question, we're taking very considerable steps to keep the material safe.
That was Barton Gellman, writer for The Washington Post and senior fellow for the Century Foundation. And while we're on the topic of Edward Snowden, the NSA whistleblower just released an alternative Christmas message. Britain's Channel 4 chose him to deliver their annual response to Queen Elizabeth's royal Christmas message. Snowden focused on the topics he has come to represent by explaining why he values privacy so greatly. Take a listen.
A child born today will grow up with no conception of privacy at all. They'll never know what it means to have a private moment to themselves, an unrecorded, unanalyzed thought. And that's a problem, because privacy matters. Privacy is what allows us to determine who we are and who we want to be.
So there you have it, Snowden's version of Christmas goodwill.